So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and it's actually going to be another good versus evil siege, just like the Siege of Caer Andros that preceded this one, albeit this one is going to have evil on the defence rather than good, and also it's going to be an all-orc affair on the defence as well, rather than a mix of evil men and good men. But Austin ERY is kind of an interesting settlement. It is very much that wedding cake style layout with very defined layers that lead up. It's quite rare that I think you'll see the defenders defend the very lowest layer, because the deployment zones are such that you can't really get to the edge and the attackers could rush you down and easily catch you off balance. But certainly the higher two layers, this one around here and then of course the final stand at the very top with all of these very fine looking manors, are going to be where the attackers make their last stand, of course. And it will be interesting to see how the attackers decide to approach this, because of course when you're facing off against the orcs when they're dug in a pretty nicely defensible settlement such as this one, it can be quite an interesting challenge, because yes, you can probably bring a decently high quality army and be able to kill them in that way, but you know, part of being on the attack in a siege is knowing that you're going to take losses trying to take the settlement, and the orcs can sort of weather those losses a little bit better than any other factions type, because of course they have much more in the way of disposable numbers. More on the orcs later. For now, let's see what the attackers have brought to the field today. It is worth saying that 2 players sent me this battle replay, but I am going to be watching it from the view of the defenders, just because it's a little bit easier to sort of see what's going on when you can see all of the defenders and their hidden stuff, if they have any, as opposed to the attackers, of course, who generally just have to move in. So we start off with Waffles here. He's going to be playing as Dorwinion. We haven't seen Dorwinion quite so much lately, and I feel as though that's because following the release of 0.97, Dorwinion are very good at what they do, but they are also a faction with quite a mono focus in many ways. Like, they're very good at a set amount of things, and they don't really stray too far away from that, because one, their roster is relatively small in terms of size, but also because, you know, it's not, there are certain situations where you don't necessarily want to play in the way that Dorwinion are most comfortable with, which is of course having the Elvelyn units, which you can see here being very nice and survivable and tough. The Elven units are very, very damaging, but also quite fragile, which can lead to some problems if they get isolated or bottled up, which they can obviously do when they're on the attack in a siege like this. But this is where units like the Elvelyn will come into their own, I think, because of course they've got very nice armour values. A base armour of 10 is higher than many of the other Western Kingdoms of men can reach, even, you know, with upgrades. Obvious exceptions to that will be Gondor, who overall of course are capable of fielding much more heavily armoured armies than Dorwinion are. But even so, you know, without any upgrades, to have a base score of 10 means that something like the Elvelyn marksmen, in spite of the fact that they're not maybe quite as good all-rounders as something like the Balaketh marksman or Bardian marksman, this is the sort of company they keep. They are a very strong and competent skirmish archer, and to add into that, they actually have more numbers per unit than those 2 units that I just mentioned as well. So yeah, definitely a good choice to bring as much Elvelyn as you possibly can with Dorwinion on the attack here, because you can definitely play the long game with Dorwinion both on the field and in a siege like this. Speaking of which, Elvelyn Isengard, of course, much in the same way that other spears of this type are, they are not particularly damaging against infantry. They only have an attack of 3, I think it is. Add on top of that the Spear Malice, and they're going to be doing their killing very, very slowly against infantry. But, you know, they do have the shield wall, which means they can potentially mass push, get my words out correctly there. It's unlikely they'll want to do that against the orcs because of how many orcs can form a nice battle line in a choke point. But even so, it is an option that does exist if they underestimate how committed Dorwinion are to a push, and also, you know, if there are cavalry units that are sort of skirting around the outside of the battle, spears can still guard the rear of the attacking army as well. But it's not too surprising to see that the Elvelyn infantry are here in greater numbers. Once again, as far as line infantry goes, their attack score is pretty average, but their defense score is where it's at. Nice shield value, very nice armor values as well. So while they may not do their killing particularly quickly, they will stay standing for an elongated period of time, and that of course means that the attack can keep going for longer, which is going to be absolutely key for the attackers as they move forward here. And then both units of really high-end infantry are on display as well. The Elvelyn Hammerguard, which of all the Elvelyn units are kind of the exception to the rule. They may be a bodyguard unit, but even so, they are most certainly not a defensive unit. They are definitely all about the offense. They may have multiple HP and obviously very nice armor values, as the Elvelyn tend to have. But they are also, you know, first and foremost a bodyguard tier shock infantry unit with AP. Very, very nice, sort of similar sort of thing to the Tharbad Warhammers, of course. Similar sort of armor styles in many ways. But It'll be interesting to see how they perform here, because obviously they're going to need to lay down a lot of damage, as of course are the Morroquendi Glade Masters. You know, the kind of company they keep includes something like the Elven King's Palace Guard from Mirkwood. So it's certainly one of the finest Elven infantry units in the game. And again, you know, very, very difficult to kill. Even the only way to really deal with them efficiently would be to try and overwhelm them in melee, or of course to shoot them. We shall see if the defenders are able to do that. And of course there's bound to be hidden units around as well, whether that be Morroquendi bows or any mounted units as well, like the horse archers, the Morroquendi stalkers, and of course the Nandor Glade Guard, which are of course shock infantry. I'd be very surprised not to see them, to be honest with you. Then in the middle we have Arthedain, who's played by 24. Is that really his name? Yes, it is. Well, that's interesting. 24, who is going to be playing as Arthedain, and he has got some Arthedain marksman with the armour upgrade as well, so a similar philosophy here to the Elvalin marksman. Even with the armour upgrade though, they're actually not quite as durable as the Elvalin marksman, which is worth bearing in mind. They do have slightly more numbers in the unit as well, which of course can more than make up for that. We have got some Arthedain marksmen over here as well, some of them with the chainmail faces, which they tend to get if you upgrade the armour for some unknown reason. Some Evendim archers, so it does look as though Arthedain dipping into their entry-level archers, so they definitely intend, I think, to try and skirmish over a longer period of time, which is not necessarily the worst thing to do with Arthedain at all, especially when you're on a siege like this. You need to try and whittle the enemies down a little bit. Arthedain men-at-arms, fully upgraded as well, so again going for much the same sort of approach as the Elvalin infantry. With both levels of armour upgrade, they're probably around the same sort of level as the Elvalin infantry, to be honest with you. They'll perform very similar roles irregardless of that, not necessarily showstoppers in melee with regards to their damage, but they will at least survive long enough to keep your attack going for a long period of time, which of course can be all you need to do if you're on the attack, potentially sometimes. We've got some Arthedain pikemen as well, with the armour upgrade once again, so the breastplate does mean that they won't be quite so vulnerable to enemy missiles, or at least arrows. But once again, not really ideal for them to be under arrow fire anyway. Numinous Gate Guards as well, obviously a fantastic unit of pikes which will buff the morale of nearby units, as well as being a very strong unit of pikemen in their own right. Maybe not up and among the kind of units like the 1st Legion pikes, but not too far off. Very, very strong. Once upon a time they were multiple HP, just like the Karas Gladhon's Guardians, though those days are long since past. Ones of the North with their armour-piercing arrows as well, very, very nice of course, and very nice heavy swordsmen in melee. Dismounted Knights of Numinous, really, really tough. Like, again, Knights of Numinous are sort of the epitome of a tanky unit in this game, whether mounted or dismounted. And of course, a Trebuchet, which very accurate now in .97. Not a lot of ammo though, so they do need to use it wisely. Maybe not the best angle for a Trebuchet, but we shall see. They may get fortunate with a couple of their shots. And then finally, on the attack, we have Shrian's 3661, who's going to be playing as Imladris. So a very quality heavy faction this. And in terms of melee, they definitely have the scariest infantry of the three factions that are on the attack today, especially considering what Arthedain seems to have brought with some of their more defensive units, rather than stuff like the Peacekeepers and the Fornost Array Knights. Swords of Rivendell with the armour upgrade, even the entry-level Imladris unit is to be taken seriously in melee, especially when they're going up against stuff like Orcs, because basic Orc infantry will not stand a chance against even the most lowly Elven troops, especially with the armour upgrade as well, just to give them that little bit more solidity in melee. But, of course, the pride and joy of the Imladris front line is, without doubt, the Imladris Guardians, especially with the armour upgrade. Definitely one of the finest line infantry units in the game, if not the finest. I'm personally a little bit partial to the Noldorin Guard in that regard, but Imladris overall do tend to have sort of a more well-rounded force, I think, in terms of their infantry anyway. Eldraenway Spearmen as well, so obviously a nice core to the army once again. It's very unlikely you'll see the Elves mass push, which is obviously one of the main things you can do with the shield wall on the attack. But even so, the Eldraenway Spears, their stats are so good that the Spear Valus doesn't overly affect them, to be honest with you. Noratuno Warriors as well, nice to see them, dual wielders in melee. Then heading up onto the hill, looks like Imladris intend to maybe go around, maybe try and put some pressure on the side, which is not the worst idea by any means. The Gwythi Rockdor, again, good to see some cavalry. I'd imagine that maybe there's a unit of Morroquendi Stalkers or two on the other side of things as well, but it does give the attackers license to sort of roam around the outside and make sure that the defenders cannot sort of sally out with their own cav force without any sort of obstruction, which is nice. Eldraenway Swordmasters is a really, really strong unit of heavy swordsmen, as we have seen in the past. We've got some more Swords of Rivendell, some more Imladris Guardians, Eldarenway Archers. Like the Eldarenway, most Elven units have got sort of a heavier core of units, and the Eldarenway for Imladris represents sort of a level that's even higher than that. So the Eldarenway Archers really, really strong at range and in melee. More Eldarenway Spearmen, and over here we have the Gwythi Arthedain, which of course are really, really tanky spears as well. So quite a quality-focused army this from Imladris. Not necessarily the worst thing in the world, considering Dorwinion and Arthedain can certainly dip into numbers a little bit more. But of course it does mean that if they do get bottled up, especially considering who's on the defence, they could be in for a bit of trouble, because on the defence it is a combination of the Misty Mountains and Isengard, both of which have got access to the dreaded crossbows, of course. Speaking of which, we have Florian, who is going to be playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. Certainly the most numbers-focused faction in the game, I think, because even though Mordor can rival their numbers, Mordor do have a little bit more of a focus around their high-end units than the Misty Mountains do. Heavy Goblin Spears, though, a very efficient unit to have on the front line, very good at holding the line with their shield wall, and of course the AP does mean they've got a little bit more potency in melee than spears of this type often do, which is very nice. A nice phalanx unit here from the Heavy Goblin Halberds, and there isn't a huge amount of pikemen on display from the attackers, it must be said, so even a unit of a lowly Heavy Goblin Halberds might be sufficient to hold the line in several places. We have the Drake Broodlings, which are a really strange unit. Either they will achieve absolutely nothing, or they will lay their opponents to waste. Like most bestial units, they do tend to be very changeable from battle to battle. They do have a glitch which happens to them where if they charge, their charge bonus sort of carries on even when they're in melee, which means they can just munch through absolutely anything in the game. But that is rare, so we'll see if that happens here. But it does offer the Misty Mountains a very mobile unit, because they're very, very quick, the Drake Broodlings. But, of course, with the cavalry from Imladris and potentially from Dorwinion as well, they won't have a free shot at doing that. Heavy Goblin Archers, I mean, even though obviously Misty Mountains do have crossbows, they do need to have some archers at the very least, otherwise they will just find themselves with nothing to answer the enemy archers at long range, especially seeing as the terrain advantage they have. They really need to take advantage of that as much as they can, and even though the Heavy Goblin Archers are pretty trashy, it's better than having nothing, which would be Misty Mountains' only other choice really. Mountain Uruk Host, a very efficient unit of line infantry indeed. The Uruk-hai infantry they're fighting alongside is probably the best comparison to them, to be honest with you. We have yet more Heavy Goblin Archers, more Heavy Goblin Spears. A few units at the back over here. There is of course a road that leads up over here, so we've got some Heavy Goblin Spears, and there's another unit around here as well, Goblin Infantry, which are hiding. And then up here on the high ground we have got some crossbows, completely unsurprised to see them. Some Black Uruks of the mountains, so some nice heavy swordsmen. Most of the Misty Mountains units really lack melee defense and melee attack in melee. But that's not something the Black Uruks suffer with. Their weaknesses are elsewhere, like most heavy swordsmen. They suffer when they're under range fire, even with the shields they wear on their backs. Snow Trolls, very quick trolls, maybe not quite as tanky as trolls from other factions, but still. White Uruk Fearmongers, a really nice unit of Phalanx Orcs to have on the defence as well. We've got some Black Uruks, some Blackback Mountain Berserkers, really, really damaging, of course, very scary, but they do tend to fizzle out after a while in a similar way to sort of lesser Berserker units, as it were. More Heavy Goblin Halberdiers, more Mountain Uruk Host. I'm glad to see the Mountain Uruk Host being used instead of the Heavy Goblin Infantry, because they're by far the better choice in the game at the moment. And some Cave Trolls, which primarily are line breakers, but you can also use it to break up a quick attack if that is what the attackers decide to do. And then finally, one of the players who sent it in, Waffles was the other player to send this one in, it must be said, but we're going to be seeing it from the perspective of Lango, because he is on the defence and he is going to be playing as Isengard, a very popular faction as of late. Very balanced indeed. Uruk-hai crossbow is one of the main events, of course. We have the Isengard Ballista, which could be really, really useful on this map for potentially sniping out the Trebuchet. That would definitely be one of the most useful things it could do, because it's kind of awkward to get the Ballista into a good firing position when it's sort of on a slope, but we'll see if Lango can manage it. Snaga Skirmishers, some Uruk-hai pikemen back here, some Uruk-hai Raiders just to flesh out the numbers a little bit, so that would be the equivalent to the Heavy Goblin Infantry from the other faction, whereas of course the Uruk-hai Infantry, the equivalent to the Mountain Uruk Host. Very, very reliable unit to have on the front line indeed. Over here, the mighty Naz-kai, which of course pretty much the equivalent to the Blackback Berserkers. Isengard and the Misty Mountains do have quite a few similarities, but Isengard obviously certainly a little bit more focused around their mid-tier, Misty Mountains more so around their low-tier. Uruk-hai Berserkers is obviously a really, really nice unit of very high damage shock infantry. After their hit points are gone, they will fizzle out pretty quickly, but while those hit points are up, they're a very damaging and deadly unit. Snaga Skirmishers are over here. Some Trolls of the White Hand, so plentiful Trolls on the field today for the defenders. Be interesting to see how they're used. Uruk-hai archers, some more Isengard troops here at the front as well, some infantry, crossbows, pikes and raiders. Obviously the core of any Isengard army, these 3 units, excluding the raiders of course, and then archers and infantry. Good to see Isengard bringing at least some Uruk-hai archers. Like, they're not particularly brilliant. You do need to at least contest that long range game, otherwise the attackers will be able to dictate the pace right from the off, which is not what you want. Like, if you're the defenders, you want to be the one sort of dictating to the attackers sort of the ranged game at the very least. Dunlanding veterans are also over here as well, just to make up the numbers. So yeah, I think without further ado, let's begin. Definitely going to be an interesting fight, this, I think. It always is when the Orcs are on the attack, especially considering how numbers heavy both Isengard and the Misty Mountains seem to be in comparison to the other armies that are around the outside over here. Like, here's Dorwinion, so yeah, Nandor Glade Guard, a couple of units of them revealing themselves. They're pretty fragile in terms of their armour values, but they are a unit of shock infantry that I believe has AP. I'm 99% sure they have AP, which is obviously going to be useful. Like, both Isengard and the Misty Mountains, most of their defence comes down to their armour. So if you can do as much AP damage as you possibly can, that will be a good thing. One thing that actually Imladris lack a little bit of is AP, but their stats are so good that they don't necessarily need it. Like, really, any AP they have tends to come at the end of their lances on horseback. Not so much in melee. They have sort of more swords and sort of, yeah, like those elven curved blades and spears, that sort of thing. Isengard sort of putting themselves into position as well. Uruk-hai crossbowmen. Like, this I think is going to be the main challenge for the attackers to try and overcome here. The amount of crossbows that are going to be on the defence. Like, both defending factions have got access to decent crossbows. Isengard especially, because of course they back it up by having very nice armour as well, at least for what they cost. So for the time being, Arthedain just sort of taking their time. They're going to receive some support from Imladris, and another wing of the Imladris army is going to go round to the side. That is going to be the key here, sort of crafting your siege, crafting your assault is going to be important here, because what the attackers are going to want to do is they're going to want to take this layer, of course, as efficiently as they possibly can, but when it comes to attacking this top layer here, they want to be attacking all sides at once. In addition to that, they want to be making sure that they are in a position to close in quickly once they've taken this layer, because all the time they're on the second layer down here, they're going to be taking range fire, whether it be from the Snaga skirmishers we can see here, the archers, or of course the ever-present and ever-deadly crossbowman. That, I think, is going to be one of the main factors in this battle going forwards. Dorwinion moving forward pretty quickly, to be honest with you, which pleases me sadly. I mean, 25k frames is not necessarily the longest battle that you can see in 3rd Age Reforged, but considering it's a 2v3 siege, that's probably about par for the course, I would say. It's going to be very interesting to see how even Dorwinion seem to be splitting their focus a little bit, which means quite a lot of the attacking armies overall are going to be going from the front. Not necessarily sure I agree with that personally. I think Dorwinion, if Imladris is going to help out Arthedain a little bit, I think Dorwinion can probably get away with sending all of their army around the back here to try and put some pressure on Isengard's rear defences over here. Uruk-hai pikemen and infantry already on the front line. Uruk-hai archers. I mean, this is the thing. Like, one thing I would potentially worry about for the defenders here is the fact that their archer forces, both Isengard and the Misty Mountains, are very lackluster, and they're going up against Arthedain, a faction with just good archers all around. Imladris, who's, you know, in comparison to the other elves, Imladris' archers are maybe not quite as strong, but they're still elven archers. They're still far superior to anything Isengard or the Misty Mountains have, and Dorwinion, who, when it comes to a skirmish fight, they are very, very comfortable indeed. So, from an archer perspective, you definitely give the advantage to the attackers here, which is an interesting situation to be in. Over on the other side over here, so Imladris are going to be heading up onto what is the first layer here, obviously undefended. It'd be interesting to see if the defenders would defend this layer, because even, to be honest, even in a 5v3 or a 4v4, like, would you really defend an area that's so open? I think the first layer on this particular map is more of a given, that the attackers are going to be able to take it without really any sort of pushback. Uruk-hai berserkers over here, and it is going to be interesting to see how long Isengard decide to try and hold on to this position over here as well. What have we here? Uruk-hai crossbowmen cranking their crossbows as we speak, and they're going to try and shoot into some of these infantry units. What are they going to go for? Nandor Glade Guard? The Glade Masters are right there. They're going to go after... Yeah, they're going after the Hammer Guard over here, the Elvellyn Hammer Guard. And that's not the kind of unit you want to lose. But interestingly enough, the only kills they actually got there were stray shots into the back of the Elvellyn Vine Guard. So not the end of the world for Dorwinion, but they don't want to be taking too many hits to one of their damage-dealing units like that, because the downside to being so good in an attrition-y kind of fight in the way that Dorwinion are, especially with a very heavily Elvellyn crafted army, is the fact that very few of their units are high damage, and those that are you need to look after. Otherwise you can end up being all defense with no bite. Mountaineer at Coast, meanwhile, taking fire point blank from the Evendim Archers. Fortunately for them, they're decently armoured and shielded in the Evendim Archers. While they may be very good for militia archers, the Evendim units in general, for what they cost, are very nice. A unit of heavy line infantry like this is going to be relatively comfortable, even under direct fire like this. If this was a unit of better archers, like a unit of heavy elven archers, it would be a little bit more dicey. The Dol style armour here, doing its work. Yeah, I would retreat the Mountaineer at Coast behind the Heavy Goblin Spears. The Heavy Goblin Spears' armour is less effective, but their shields are just as good, and they're a cheaper unit. Like, when things get grisly in melee, the Mountaineer at Coast are going to be able to withstand some of the stronger units of the attackers a little bit better, whereas the Heavy Goblin Spears, they're really just there to hold the line, and any damage they do with their AP is going to be a nice bonus. Meanwhile, arrows flying all over the place. The Misty Mountains trying to do some damage to Imladris, but Imladris has got pretty good cover from the cliffs here. It's not the ideal angle to be shooting into them. Elder Renway Spearmen taking point, Gwaith the Arthedain. Some of these projectiles are finding their marks, but even those that are going into very heavily armoured elven troops, which not going to be the worst thing for them. Goblin infantry and heavy goblin spears holding this line down. So they're going to be trying to hold on here. The goblin infantry reveals itself, but neither of these two units alone are going to be able to withstand a genuine push from Imladris. They're just going to be here to buy time. More reinforcements are on the way over, however. The Mountaineer at Coast, a little bit better, but again, like when you're dealing with elven quality like this, what you really need to be doing is getting some range support in here to try and deal with that. But unfortunately, you can see here the elves doing exactly the right thing here. Shreyans, he's going to be getting around through the gap, and this is where panic could start to set in. I like how he didn't overextend himself there. The temptation, I think, would have been to just run this single unit in behind enemy lines, but then he would run the risk of getting it surrounded and overwhelmed. As it is, he's managed to sort of make the line a little bit compromised for the Misty Mountains, and he's going to be able to work his way up the line very easily, because the only thing stopping the Imladris Guardians from doing that are a unit of Goblin Infantry, which are very quickly going to get cut to pieces at the hands of these Elven Warriors. And from the front, Imladris' attack is under no danger of falling apart, because the angle is such that no crossbow bolts are going to be able to find their way into them, or at least not many. And Elder Renway Spearmen and Gwaith the Arthedain are two units with very, very high holding power, so they're in a good way. Over here, what is this? Ah, I see. So some elven units are just sort of waiting around over here. Meanwhile, this is quite interesting. So a pretty interesting push coming in here from Dorwinion. Isengard holding on. Isengard's lines, to be fair, this choke point over here is a little bit narrower, so it's a little bit more, it's a little bit nicer to hold on to than the one that the Misty Mountains are having to hold on to against Imladris. But also, this front line was a little bit more well prepared for some quality units coming forward and engaging them, because heavy Goblin Spears and Goblin Infantry are one thing, Uruk-hai Infantry backed up by Uruk-hai Pikemen are quite another, and as soon as a big push came in, the Trolls and the Dunlanding Veterans were also committed in as well to really stop Dorwinion in their tracks, which is good, because to be honest, Isengard want this to be a melee engagement. They don't want this to be a long, drawn-out affair at range, because that's where the Elvellyn Marksmen can shine. Having said that, the Elvellyn Marksmen also have a very, very nice shot right into the centre mass of all of that Isengard infantry as well. They're quite fortunate that most of it is heavily armoured, or shielded, or both. There's a lot of Dorwinion troops there. Like, this is the thing, like, Dorwinion are capable of sustaining aggression, whether it's at range or in melee, for quite a long time. And you can actually see over here as well, committing the Trolls, I think, was maybe a little bit overkill. I think just having the Dunland Veterans add themselves to this defence probably would have been enough with the phalanx of the Pikes. Because sending in the trolls over here, you can see how they're dying, and that's because of the Nandor Guard and the Morroquendi Glade Masters are in here. Like, both of those two units, but especially the Glade Masters, are extremely high damage and AP. And that's exactly the sort of unit which is going to be very effective against trolls. The trolls would have done a decent amount of damage, especially to the Elvelyn, but I don't know. We saw Arthedain use the trolls very, very nicely in a battle that was just passed, but that was maybe a little bit too gung-ho there. Meanwhile, 24 is now going to be assaulting from the front as well with Arthedain. Arthedain men-at-arms charging into the Mountain Uruk host. There are also some heavy goblin spears there, so this Misty Mountains front line is a little bit more like it. And on top of that, they're not going up against Imladris either. They're going up against the sort of bread and butter of Arthedain. Don't get me wrong though, Arthedain men-at-arms are still not a unit that can be taken lightly. Human men-at-arms units like this from the Western Kingdoms are tanky. Like, they may not do damage particularly quickly, but they will take a beating. And add into that, of course, Arthedain, they can bring a lot of pikes usually. I think this is the only unit of regular pikemen they've got today. This, or maybe they've got two. But obviously this makes Arthedain pretty good in a long, grindy fight as well. Meanwhile, let's see what's happening over here. I mean, Imladris, it looked, yeah, and you can see here that doing a quick lap around, and by the time we get back to Imladris' front line, rather unsurprisingly, I would say, the Misty Mountains front line is now starting to fall apart, which to me this means the defenders are probably going to have to pull back to the final layer sooner than they would have liked. We saw in the last battle the defenders do that very quickly, and I thought that was quite risky. It ended up paying off in the end. This time around, however, I don't think they're going to have too much of a choice. You can see here the heavy goblin archers are firing in, but they're low quality archers, so firing into these really heavily armoured and shielded Imladris troops isn't going to be too much of a problem. They may pick up the odd kill here and there, which, to be fair, against Eldarenwe and Gwythe units is worthwhile. But if Imladris can quickly reorganise themselves and push in here, they should absolutely do so, because, I mean, Mountain Uruk Coast, these units are just routing. The cave trolls are here. They do have these heavy goblin halberdiers, but this is nothing to be concerned about, this rabble down here for Imladris. They can just move forward and do the damage, do the business. And this is where the dominoes should start to fall. Uruk-hai archers are here, because as soon as one defensive position falls away, that's where the rest of them should follow suit. Like, well, yeah, you can see over here, I think Isengard has seen what has happened and has actively decided to pull back before Imladris had the opportunity to recharge them with the Gwythe Arthedain. Definitely the right thing to do. They will take losses on the retreat, as I said in the last battle. Retreating like this, you're going to take losses as you try and pull back, but the decision was taken out of the defenders' hands here. They had to do this. So better to just pull the band-aid off now and get it over with, and start thinking about settling into your final defensive position. We'll see if the Misty Mountains does the same over here. The Misty Mountains' attentions are probably preoccupied in trying to salvage the Imladris situation. So really it's just going to continue as is here on the front side of the settlement for a little while. Arthedain though, bit of range fire coming in from the defenders, which may be enough to tilt the balance of power here toward the Misty Mountains, but there's also a bit of friendly fire coming in as well, so I guess it's much of a muchness really, and I do think the phalanx and the pikes is going to be fairly telling on the front line. That is, you know, Imladris should be able to come forward and also do the business. Another unit of Arthedain men-at-arms coming forward, really piling the pressure onto these outer defences over here. The Isengard Ballista is now firing, apparently. What are they firing at? The classic Medieval 2 siege, as they sort of start spinning on the spot. Is the trebuchet in range? I don't think so. I mean, as soon as Arthedain do pour forwards after this front line does inevitably fall, it says victory seems certain at the moment, but when all is said and done it will crumble eventually. As soon as they start to pour forward, that might be the opportunity to get a few pot shots into Arthedain as they move forward. The Isengard Ballista is a very effective piece of siege equipment, and very accurate as well. Meanwhile, Imladris continuing to come forward. I mean, Imladris have really shown their quality in this battle so far. I think that you could definitely... Oh, hello, God Helene. I recognise that projectile. The Imladris Silverthorns. I mean, I did say that among the elves, Imladris have got the least amount of focus on their archers, and I would still say that's true. Although, is it? I feel as though that's actually not true. I feel as though Linden have got less of a focus around archers. But Linden have got all those javelins which muddy the waters a little bit, and also they do technically have rangers. It's an interesting distinction that can be made between the two high elven factions, but The God Helima here with their Silver Thorns, very effective unit at range and in melee, of course. Imladris, meanwhile, I'm very impressed with how Shrians has conducted himself here. He's getting in behind lines, he's pushing through gaps that the Misty Mountains have left for them, and he's ruthlessly exploiting them. Like, as soon as your front line is the Misty Mountains, arguably the least quality focused faction in the game, is compromised by Imladris, the most, arguably, quality focused faction in the game, this is the inevitable result. Continuous routing, and even with their smaller army, I was a little bit concerned that if Imladris' small army got bottled up by the Misty Mountains, they could end up taking severe losses. But in the end, Imladris have not been bottled up, and the Misty Mountains so far have certainly paid the price for it. The Misty Mountains have not done anywhere near enough damage to Imladris to have made the defences worth it. I mean, there are dead elves on the floor over here, and to be fair, those Uruk-hai archers are doing a decent job, but decent is all it is. I think crossbows need to be brought into the equation here. It's possible those crossbows have decent pile of elf corpses over there, but see over here, like most of the stuff over here are dead goblins and very little else. Meanwhile, Isengard deciding not to fall back to the hill. They are going to hold on to this choke point instead on the second layer, and they are taking javelin fire from behind, and that's why it's a very nice position here. The javelins firing into the backs of this Dorwinion push, but Dorwinion will endure for a little while longer. I think Dorwinion is probably very grateful to the fact that Imladris did manage to push through, purely because they were slowly but surely gaining the upper hand on that fight out there, but their Elvelyn would have taken a lot of losses on that front line, and they need their manpower to hold together a little bit better than that going into the final stand, and that is exactly what's going to happen now. The Elvelyn's still in fine health, and the rest of the Dorwinion forces also right down near the cliff. I mean, due to the Medieval 2 mechanics, this is the safest place for them, because it means they can't get hit by range units, of course. In real life, this would be the absolute worst place for them, because they just get bombarded even easier. Over here, meanwhile, Isengard's front line is just very depleted at this point, and Isengard, I think they are now seeing they're going to need to pull back. So they're going to leave these Uruk-hai pikemen behind as a bit of a rear guard. The javelins are still coming in, the Uruk-hai archers are firing in. The damage will be done to Dorwinion here, but maybe not crippling damage in the way that they maybe would have hoped. What's going on over here? Yeah, and you can see eventually this front line did fall away. Let's see, Heavy Goblin Archers also being capitalised on. I think the Misty Mountains have been the punching bag in this fight so far, and I feel as though it's a result of having to deal with two sides rather than just one. Isengard has had a fairly, I say comfortable, but like they've only had to deal with one side of things, whereas the Misty Mountains has been responsible for two, and both of these two engagements have gone relatively poorly, especially the Imladris one, but even the Arthedain one has not been too damaging for Arthedain. I mean, there are a fair few men-at-arms corpses on the floor here. Oof. And that trebuchet hitting into the centre mass of the Isengard troops over here. Evendim archers were moving forward. A ballista bolt coming in, but unfortunately missing. That one didn't, though. That was a fantastic hit, and that was the main thing that I was worried about from Arthedain. As soon as they start pouring forward up this choke point, that ballista could get a nice pot shot, and that was better than I could have asked to see, to be honest with you. I think most of that was like Evendim archers and Arthedain marksmen, to be fair, so not hugely important troops, but just the sheer number that died in that shot there. That's the Isengard ballista at its best. That's the sort of thing it used to do on the regular in the previous patch of the game, before it was toned down a little bit. Now you have to get an ideal shot to see that kind of carnage, and that was an ideal shot to say the least. But now Isengard are going to pick up the slack on this side instead, which is sorely needed. Like, that's the thing, losing Micro, like having to deal with two fronts that are collapsing at once, is difficult for the Misty Mountains. So I do have a bit of sympathy for him there. It's not as if he could have done too much more. Like, he could have constructed his line against Imladris initially a little bit better, but since then he's been sort of trying to save a sinking ship. And we'll be kind and say it's been mixed success at best. The cave trolls have come in with these archers in support for Isengard. That's not bad. I mean, here the trolls try to come in and do some damage to the Noratirno. A bit of a countercharge there from the Gwythi Rock Door, skewering two of them. And now in melee, the Imladris Guardians are coming in as well, so the cave trolls will be brought down. Among all the trolls, they're probably the weakest in sustained melee, to be honest with you. Their mass makes them fantastic for breaking lines, but that's not the ideal situation for them to be in. Like, against a really quality elven infantry units, they're going to struggle, and that was more, again, a bit more desperation from the Misty Mountains than anything else. The Misty Mountains, I mean, the Uruk-hai crossbows are coming down here. I think they need to just sort of pull back to the final layer at this point. More Misty Mountains troops are heading up. They definitely need to start fortifying the final layer, in my opinion. Because, I mean, it is what it is. The Black Uruks can act as a decent rearguard. I mean, they won't fold before the Elves quite as easily as most of the other Misty Mountains troops in a 1v1. God Helene starting to fire their Silverthorns as well. I mean, that's a nice blob to go after. The Uruk-hai crossbows are exposed. So far, Imladris have done everything right, I think. The problem with Imladris in this situation, though, is their numbers are so low that even if they do everything right, they could find themselves running out of manpower, you know, before the battle is won. And in which case, they'll then have to rely on sort of Dorwinion and Arthedain. But Dorwinion, I think, have taken the most losses among all the attackers. And part of that is because I think Isengard have dealt relatively well with the approach again. Part of that is because Isengard only had Dorwinion to focus on, whereas the Misty Mountains had to divide their attention a little bit. But very good positioning here. Like, I think especially the Snaga skirmishers, when we get to the end screen, I'm sure they will have got themselves a very nice amount of kills. Because there's a lot of dead Elvel in here. And I think Dorwinion are the most battered and bruised of all the attacking armies thus far. Some Snaga on the front line as well that are out of ammunition, of course. Snaga skirmishers in melee are very poor. They're not really going to be too much of a match for professional Dorwinion heavy infantry. More Isengard troops on that hill, though, a combination of raiders and pikemen, so no rest for the weary for Dorwinion. Slowly but surely they're making progress, but they're taking damage all the while. Do they have enough left? I mean, they've still got a decent chunk of their units, including their elites, including more shock infantry. So they definitely have the damage still. Arthedain sending over some support, so Arthedain spreading their focus a little bit. It's good to see the attackers are not just focusing on individual choke points themselves, they are helping one another out if they need it. And Imladris Guardians heading that way. So Arthedain are actually the first ones to start making a genuine attempt on taking the top of the settlement here. And to be fair, with all their archer support, in full view, those Uruk-hai infantry and pikemen don't have any cover against the Arthedain marksmen who are shooting directly into them. This is a pretty good situation for them to be in. Like, I have to say, the attackers have approached this battle very well up to this point. Will that continue? Anuminas Gate Guards moving forward, so again, the finest phalanx unit that Arthedain have. They're going to be buffing the morale of the troops on the front line as well, making them less likely to rout in the face of the Orc phalanx. Javelins coming in, but those Snaga very weak to arrow fire, and they're immediately taking losses. The Dunedain Rangers are coming forward as well, so Arthedain now, very much the momentum is in their hands. The question is, can they hold on to it? I mean, Uruk-hai crossmen, they don't have the best of shots though on the front line. Like, these crossbows need to do something, I agree. The Rangers are going to start to fire as well, the Dunedain Rangers. Yeah, and they've got a really nice shot. I think, honestly, this situation is grim enough for Isengard to actually pull back and try and sort of form like a horseshoe-shaped line at the top of the hill, rather than stay where they are. Because it certainly hasn't gone their way thus far. Meanwhile, Imladris, like you can see, Imladris' army pretty small, but high quality. I think this is where Imladris could come unstuck though. Like, they've done very well up to this point, but now the Misty Mountains should have what it takes in terms of numbers to bottle Imladris up, and all they need to do, get them into a nice position to shoot with the crossbows, and Imladris' smaller army will start to look a lot less scary. Doesn't matter how high quality the enemy trooper is, if you shoot them between the eyes with a crossbow bolt. That is the philosophy that the Misty Mountains and Isengard do tend to run on, especially in a siege like this, but these crossbows are not in an ideal place, to be honest with you. They're having to arc their shots. What they really need to be is over here, because they've got a decent shot there. I say that. Again, it's kind of an awkward position, this, for the Misty Mountains. I mean, they could try and sort of go here and shoot in, but again, it's maybe not ideal. They need to do something, though. Snaga skirmishers over here. Still the Drake Broodlings, still some Snow Trolls, still a lot of elite infantry for the Orcs. Over here, meanwhile, the joint assault now from Arthedain and Dorwinion. A litany in plate armour. Oof, what was that? Well, heavy goblin crossbows are firing in, which, to be fair, if they had a better angle, would be ideal at dealing with all this heavily armoured line infantry. This is pretty much what Dorwinion have in reserve. Still got the Hammer Guard. I think maybe the Glade Masters might be in there already, if not already dead? Question mark? What's going on over here? Is this them? No, that's the Gwythi Rock Door. Gwythi Rock Door, it'd be interesting to see if they find further use in this battle. If they do, like if Imladris managed to make a hole big enough for the Gwythi Rock Door to charge in, even if it results in their death, they should do it, because the chaos that they could cause could be the final nail in the coffin for the defenders here, as they desperately try to hold on to this settlement. They're ill-gotten gains, because there's no way the Orcs would be capable of building a place like this. God Helene using those Silverthorns. They're having to arc their shots as well, though, so not ideal. But once again, Shrians going after the right kind of unit. The Black Uruks, more of a threat in melee than most of what the Misty Mountains have, and they're going to be a little bit more fragile to that sort of thing, because their shield value is not quite as high. So again, good play from Imladris. Meanwhile, Uruk-hai Crossmen, what are they firing at? They're over here, so they're trying to shoot into the... It was definitely the ranged units actually from Arthedain that were causing the lion's share of the trouble here. The Dunedain Rangers are still firing. I mean, this is obviously a terrifying unit to behold. Neither Dorwinion nor Imladris have got access to Rangers, but the Dunedain are of course a massive part of Arthedain's identity, and the Rangers are the most famous of them. But, I have to say, there's a lot of Arthedain troops, but they're still being clogged up by Isengard. Like, without reinforcements, the attackers will win that, but reinforcements are on the way. Another unit of pikes, of all things. But I mean, they are clogged up. If there's one thing Isengard can do very competently, it's hold a point with their pikes and back it up with their crossbows. Meanwhile, more Dorwinion troops coming in. I don't think Dorwinion can expect to receive any more support from Arthedain than this one unit of men-at-arms. So Dorwinion are going to have to do the rest all on their lonesome. There's Heavy Goblin crossbows firing in. Heavy Goblin halberdiers are backing up the ever-dwindling numbers of Uruk-hai on the front line. The Uruk-hai pikes looking a little bit more thin on the ground now, but it's going to have to be the crossbows that do the damage. But like I said, Dorwinion I think have taken a lot of punishment in this battle, and yet they're still chugging away. When it comes to attrition, they are a very, very competent faction indeed. More bolts finding their marks. Now, there are some Evendim archers over here, but that's not exactly the finest unit that Arthedain can send over to support in melee. But it's better than nothing. Just having warm bodies on the front line for the attackers can often be enough. Meanwhile, over here you can see actually the elves once again trying to sort of, and they did sort of manage to get around the side once again of the Misty Mountains line, but this time the Misty Mountains were having none of it. They weren't going to allow the elves to get a foothold yet again on them, and this time they collapsed on those Eldarenway like a ton of bricks. The Eldarenway swordmasters and spearmen getting charged down by fearmongers, snow trolls and black uruks, and that's a decent chunk of casualties the elves have just taken. He thought he could get away with it for a third time, Shrians, and why not? I think actually if he had if he maybe had these units down here, if he had maybe another unit of Imladris Guardians in there, it maybe would have been more difficult to actually stabilise the situation for the Misty Mountains. But got to give credit to the Misty Mountains there, like they weren't going to get caught out by that sort of thing a third time. But the problem that the Misty Mountains have is they're still taking losses from the arrows, the crossbows and the White Uruk Fearmongers. Individual unit models are falling all the time. And of course when all is said and done, still going to have to deal with something like the God Halim in melee. Definitely something to be concerned about. Got to be careful those Dunedain Rangers don't fire while I zoom in on this fight. But over here, we saw Imladris try to push through on the side of the line. This, however, is a much more straightforward push from Arthedain. They're just trying to push forward and flood over the top layer. Dismounted Knights of Venuminous in the vanguard. All of the standard Arthedain troops following them in. The Snow Trolls are going to try and stabilise the situation, but it's not going to be enough. The goblins that were holding things down are running for the hills. The Isengard Ballista is going to need to get some shots quickly if they don't want to get engaged in melee. The Uruk-hai Berserkers are coming in. Berserkers will be very good against the vast majority of Arthedain troops that are here. But alone, I'm not so sure. And also now the Rangers have re-revealed themselves, and of course, as soon as those hit points are gone, Rangers will rip right on through Uruk-hai Berserkers. Over here, meanwhile, are they going to try and push on this side as well? No, they're still going for the old-fashioned, tried-and-true approach of slowly grinding the opponent down over here, are Dorwinion. And I think that's right. I mean, Dorwinion don't have, I think, quite the same numbers to try a big-scale push like Arthedain are doing. But they don't necessarily need to. All they need to do is just keep up the assault, keep the attention, make sure that the defenders have to defend 3 choke points rather than just 2, and they're going to be contributing here to their team's victory? Question mark? I do think the attackers are in a good position here, but you'd be amazed how quickly things can fall apart, especially when you're dealing with a really high quality army like Imladris is here. They've done so well up till this point, but you're always hovering one wrong move away from destruction when you're attacking with a small army. Doesn't matter how strong Imladris are in melee, if they get dictated to by the Misty Mountains in this sort of situation, they're going to be in trouble. The Elder Runway, they are cutting their way through Snaga with reckless abandon, and you can see once again the elves actually this time they have managed to get around the side, and I don't think the Misty Mountains have got enough at this point to actually stop them. So once again, I said he wouldn't get caught out by it for a third time, but he has really, because Shrians, now he commits forward the Imladris Guardians, buckles the Misty Mountains lines, and once again Imladris pushing the Misty Mountains ever further backwards. I mean, they're running out of places to retreat to at this point. Snaga are routing. Not too surprising there. They're going to need to fortify themselves somewhere here. The defenders. I mean, they do have the Drake Broodlings. I'm actually surprised they haven't used the Drake Broodlings to try and stabilise this situation. They need to do something because Imladris, the harbingers of doom that they are, ooh, a decent hit there from the Trebuchet. At this point, even grazing hits like that are going to be enough to cause real problems, I think. Dunedain Rangers out of ammunition at this stage. Nazkai are on the front line. Whatever happened to the Berserkers? Did they get pulled off? Or did they just die? Well, there are only 16 left, so yeah, the Rangers did some serious damage against the Berserkers. They're now in melee, of course, which is not ideal when you're facing off against Nazkai. Like the Nazkai, to be fair, Isengard could finish off Arthedain here. That push was unsuccessful, you have to say. It did damage, so it wasn't completely in vain, but Wardens of the North are here. Yeah, I mean, it is looking like the defenders are going to be victorious against Arthedain, but are they going to be able to be victorious against all of them? Like Dorwinion now, they're going to try and hold these two choke points back here, the defenders. Dorwinion are going to obviously chase them down and engage them once again. Black Uruks the mountains, stopping the advance of the Elvelin and any support they may have. Uruk-hai pikemen getting into place as well, or what's left of them anyway. Phalanx down. It'll take pikes quite a long time to defeat heavily armoured troops like the Elvelin, but it will at least stop them from just pushing forwards with reckless abandon. Still the Black Uruks. Imladris pushing forward once again. Imladris needs to go more in than this though. They've done very little wrong in this battle so far, I have to say. But they need to be bold. Continue to be bold here. If the God Helym are out of ammunition, then their presence on the front line is going to be sorely needed. Because the White Uruk Fearmongers, they're a phalanx unit, which means they're going to be able to keep the Elder Renway and what's left of the Swords of Rivendell at arm's length. And this is the thing, like Imladris, are they going to have enough left in the tank to complete their victory here? Because, I mean, Arthedain are falling apart. Like Dorwinion, I feel as though I'm justified in saying that Dorwinion is so good in an attrition-y fight, because they've been taking punishment this whole time, and yet they've still managed to outlast most of the manpower from Imladris and Arthedain. Which is pretty impressive, to be honest. Noratuna Warriors, like, they need these Imladris Guardians on the front line here. Swords of Rivendell I'm not sure what Shrians was doing there, because charging in with a busted unit of Swords of Rivendell up against Blackback Mountain Berserkers is going to go very poorly. Over here, meanwhile, what do Dorwinion have left? I mean, there's still some Arthedain troops in support. Do they still have anything down here? No. They still have some units over there. The Hammer Guard, a couple of units of Vine Guard. I think they need to go all in here. I think the attackers right at the last, when Arthedain pushed forward with all of their stuff in a big push, I feel as though the onus was on Dorwinion and Imladris to do the same in many ways, looking back on it now. And I feel as though they haven't done that, and I feel as though at the very last step here they maybe lost the bottle. And that may be the difference here between victory and defeat here for the attackers and defenders. I mean, you can see here Arthedain are still alive, but it's a Trebuchet, it's Marksman. Dunedain Troll Slayers, that's a unit that I'm actually surprised I didn't think about before, because they're going to be very good in this situation. They should still have ammunition, and among Javelins they're a very effective unit. And of course they're very strong in melee as well, multiple HP, armor piercing on those battle axes. It's a fantastic unit to have at this late stage. Meanwhile, these Arthedain Marksmen are getting munched on by the Drake Broodlings, unsurprisingly. Obviously they're not really designed to be in melee in this way against monsters. Trebuchets moving forward. So the Wardens of the North and the Troll Slayers and the Gwythi Rockdoor, there are units, but do they have enough here? You can see here Noratuna Warriors coming in melee. And to be fair, the Norritin are warriors. Good in melee. Dual wielders. Decently damaging. The problem they have though is they're just charging right on into a phalanx unit again, which means they're not going to really make any sort of ground. Well, there's one Elder Runaway Swordmaster in there. Meanwhile, Imladris Guardians are moving in, but they're taking crossbow bolts. They're going to be engaged in melee by the Blackback Berserkers, which Imladris Guardians are really very, very good, but in this situation they're going to struggle. Ah, Grey Company from Arthedain. My. That's an interesting wrinkle in this battle now, isn't it? Interestingly enough, by firing into those very few troops on the front line over there, they're probably going to be getting more friendly fire against Dorwinion than actual kills on Uruk-hai. But we shall see. At this point, maybe they just need to get through, and I would actually agree with that. Like, I think Dorwinion, they've front-loaded their front line at this point. They've sent everything in, including the Hammer Guard, and they just want to get through here as quickly as they possibly can, try and shut down the archers and the crossbows that are waiting in behind. In come the Gwythi Rock Door. It's a very close battle, this. And I mean, with units like the Troll Slayers, like all of these hidden units that Arthedain had, the Troll Slayers, the Grey Company, they could be the big difference makers here. Because this means they're going to be able to sustain pressure from multiple angles as well, which is a big problem for the defenders, because they were really hoping, I think, for these crossbows to do the business. Ooh, hello. That's a devastating hit there into the centre mass of the Dorwinion troops and the ballista, but now they're getting chased down by the Gwythi Rock Door. The Drake Broodlings trying to get in the way, but they're falling. Both cavalry and Drake Broodlings alike are just sort of tearing into one another. And ultimately, the Gwythi Rock Door are not going to be able to kill off the whole Isengard ballista crew. They're certainly not with the Nazkai turning around. Taking a little bit of damage from their encounters with Isengard and Imladris at this point, but not enough to overly concern them. Meanwhile, Blackback Berserkers, again, very offense-focused units, so they have taken losses to the Imladris Guardians, but they've also been overwhelming victors in that little fight. Grey Company, what are they doing? What are they trying to shoot? What's the point? Trying to help their way through there. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, Dorwinion still have a decent amount of Elvellin. It may only be Elvellin Vineguard, but the defenders are struggling here because now the attackers are starting to wash over them a little bit. Units like Uruk-hai Archers are being pressed into frontline service against Elvellin Hammerguard, which is going to go very badly for them. Dunedain Troll Slayers are moving forward. Yeah, I think the attackers have got this. It was looking a little bit dicey for a little while there, but the revealing of Troll Slayers and Grey Company, I think, has certainly tilted things fairly heavily back in their favour. But it is close here because the attackers, Imladris in particular, were starting to lose most of their strength there. The God Helim are now on the front line. They should have been committed sooner, I think, because as soon as they've arrived, they've managed to buckle the sides of the White Uruk Fearmongers, and now they're finishing them off. Over here, meanwhile, Nazkai are doing their best against the Warns of the North, and Warns of the North are going to lose that fight because they're all alone, but they are at least preventing the ballista from firing, so one of the last very faint hopes for the defenders has been shut down. The Elvellin are coming forward as well, so Dorwinion's army is still in the best shape, which I think does speak quite highly of their survivability. The Elvellin units, they may not be that damaging, but they are very tough for what they are. Drake Broodlings over here are trying to feast upon some of the Arthedain marksmen once again, routing Uruk-hai Archers. That's not too surprising, of course. They were asked to face off against Hammer Guard, so them running for the hills is certainly not shameful. Meanwhile, Elvel and Hammer Guard are going to come in here. I mean, the Wards of the North are really struggling here. Dunedain Troll Slayers, they shouldn't really throw their javelins in from there because they're just going to hit the artillery pieces. And here we go. Hammers being swung. Looks like the Nazkai are going to be the last unit available. There goes Azog. He has been killed. The last of the Blackback Berserkers dealt with. Grey Company a little bit depleted at this point. Charging into melee and taking a bit of damage. But yeah, I mean, Imladris at this point on their last legs, to be sure. Which is always the risk with a smaller army, as I said. But I think they used it very well. And I'm impressed with how they were able to exploit the gaps. Well, there goes the Dorwinion general. Killed by one of the Nazkai. I think all the attackers did pretty well, though. That Arthedain push that failed still did enough damage that you couldn't really call it a victory for the defenders either, which is the key. If even your failed ideas manage to contribute to your team, then you're in a pretty good place moving forward. And I think that was the issue. Like, the defenders were never really able to recover from the losses they were dealt, particularly at the hands of Imladris in the early game, and that allowed the longevity of Dorwinion and the big push from Arthedain to really tip them over the edge, and it was always going to be quite difficult to recover from that, but that's the way it is. And a well-earned victory, I have to say, for the attackers on this occasion. And I think this is a pretty good... like, we know what Arthedain are all about. They're obviously a very balanced faction, and that showed here with, obviously, the Dunedain as well. The spice of the Dunedain being added in there, it helps them out a lot as well. But I think this was, in particular, just because of how both factions were used, a pretty good example of Imladris and Dorwinion in action, because it really showcases what those two are all about. Imladris, smaller army, but really high quality, really exploiting the gaps in the Misty Mountains, and Dorwinion just standing and fighting for a long period of time and refusing to die, essentially. And it's not to say Isengard and the Misty Mountains even played that poorly. Like, the Misty Mountains, like, the difference between victory and defeat from them could well have been the fact that the Misty Mountains left a little gap in that front line. And in the end, like, if they'd managed to hold on to that for a little bit longer, they could have done a little bit more damage to Dorwinion on the first layer. Arthedain wouldn't have been emboldened enough to push forward as aggressively as they were doing. And, yeah, I think that may be the difference. But well played all round, I think. I give a special mention to the Imladris player here, though, because he was, time and time again, you'll see players be a little bit too conservative in that situation. They'll see a gap and maybe not go for it. But Imladris most certainly did here. And more often than not, it paid off for him, in spite of his noticeably smaller army. Like, both defending armies had over 3,000, so around 6,000 total soldiers, whereas the attackers had maybe 1,500 or so less than that, and they were still able to win, which goes to show, you know, quality managed to trump quantity in this situation. But let's see what did the damage for Isengard. The Nazkai, in spite of the fact they were committed quite late, did a lot of damage, which is not surprising. They were up against mainly more heavily armoured units from Arthedain and Dorwinion, which is exactly the sort of thing they're going to like fighting against. Unsurprisingly, though, the Snaga skirmishers that were up on the cliff doing damage against Dorwinion were the ones that were pretty much the MVPs for Isengard. Like, Dorwinion managed to weather that storm, which is impressive in and of itself, but Isengard was still able to do the damage there. The pikes held down the front line for as long as they reasonably could. Uruk-hai infantry, mixed fortunes for them, to be honest. You kind of expect them to do a little bit better. The one with the 156 kills, fair enough. The other two, though, you're expecting maybe a little bit more from your Uruk-hai infantry, considering what they are and what they're supposed to do. The ballista, that one shot was really, really devastating. It's just a shame it was against some of Arthedain's less important units. And other than that, like, they got one decent shot here up in the final layer, but other than that, it was very much grazing hits. Like, the Isengard ballista does need a good position and a good blob to shoot into to be really effective, and this maybe is the kind of map that's not so easy to do. So getting just shy of 200 kills is actually quite impressive with the Isengard ballista on this occasion. Trolls of the White Hand did decently as well. Despite the fact they were committed to a situation that was pretty grisly for them, they still managed to pick up a decent number of kills before they eventually fell. But you have to ask yourself whether 137 kills on basic Elvalin is enough to justify the high cost of a unit of Trolls of the White Hand like this. They did okay considering, but I still would have maybe left them for a little bit later on. Uruk-hai crossbows did okay, but really it was the Snaga skirmishers that were the standout from Isengard for me. So yeah, big thank you to both Lango and Waffles for sending this one in. Like I said, I viewed this battle from Lango's perspective because it's often, if I have the choice, I will view it from the defender's perspective, because the attackers, like, you're going to see hidden unit. In this case, actually, the Grey Company and the Dunedain Troll Slayers, it was actually those two units that attacking hidden units that I missed. But most of the time, it's going to be more important to see hidden units for the defenders, just in case they've got like a sneaky ambush, just in case the defense is actually a little bit stronger than it first appears. That sort of reason, which is why I tend to view it from the defending perspective, if not. And also because people do tend to complain a little bit when the blue team always wins, which isn't necessarily true. And on this occasion, they didn't. So that's nice. So yeah, big thank you to them. Big thank you to all the players, because I think everyone played pretty well, to be honest with you. No really poor performances on this occasion. We saw some good examples of aggression, which is always nice. So yeah, like I said, I think next battle, there is, I think, a couple more that I want to do before I start chipping away at some of the hotfix preview battles that I've got. Like, I got a couple from Death Eater, like I said. I think I've got another one from someone else as well, so want to be doing them. But first of all, I do want to sort of clear some of the more notable battles from my backlog on the regular build. But like I said, part of it is down to timing as well. Like, depending on the kind of gap to record that I actually have available to me will depend on the length of battle that I'm actually able to do in that time. So if someone sends into me a monster like 60k frames one, obviously I'm going to need to have like a day sort of set aside to record that rather than just tack it onto the end of some university stuff. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.